So Alyssa, what's on your radar?
It is well past time to lift restrictions on European travel to the United States. So in early 2020, at the outset of COVID, then President Trump instituted a temporary travel ban on 26 European countries. At the time, COVID was rapidly spreading throughout Europe, and we still knew very little about the virus. The ban was meant to slow the spread and always intended to be temporary, originally for 30 days. Now, more than a year and a half later, after 3 vaccines have been approved for emergency use, and after 1 vaccine has been granted full FDA approval, we still nonsensically have these bans. It makes no sense scientifically, but it's also heartless. Tens of millions of Americans have loved ones in Europe that they've been unable to see throughout the pandemic. Someone very close to me, who's a dual U.S.-German citizen, gave birth to her first child and wasn't able to have her doubly vaccinated parents present for the birth or for the first few months of the baby's life. It's tragic. They'll never get that time back. There are countless stories like this of families and loved ones still separated for no reason. And there's no credible science to back up keeping the travel restrictions in place. For one, we have 3 widely available vaccines in the U.S. Nearly 50% of the American public is fully vaccinated, and more than 75% have received at least 1 shot. And in the United Kingdom, nearly 48 million people have received at least 1 dose of a coronavirus vaccine, part of the biggest inoculation program the country's ever launched. While European countries and the U.S. are seeing breakthrough cases, the rate of hospitalizations among those who've been fully vaccinated is extremely low. Based on data in the U.S., the hospitalization rate among fully vaccinated people with COVID-19 ranged from effectively 0 in California, Delaware, D.C., Indiana, New Jersey, New Mexico, Vermont, and Virginia to 0.06 in Arkansas percent. The rates of death among fully vaccinated people were even lower, effectively 0 in all but 2 reporting states, Arkansas and Michigan, where they were roughly 0.01%. But beyond the existence of largely effective vaccines, the situation around COVID has fundamentally changed since the travel ban was first implemented in early 2020. We have countless therapeutics available to treat cases. We know that masking helps to stop the spread. We're able to monitor hospital capacity better than we've ever been able to before, and we're at virtually no risk of running out of critical medical supplies. Early in COVID, there was fear that airplanes were breeding grounds for super spreaders because of the close proximity that passengers sit in. Since then, the science has proven that's in fact false. A DoD study found that airline passengers face minimal risk of contracting coronavirus when flying. According to the study, risk of, quote, aerosol dispersion, i.e. transmitting a virus through the air, was reduced by 99.7% thanks to modern air filtration systems and ventilation that exists on most modern commercial planes. Never mind the billions of dollars in tourism revenue the U.S. has lost during this non-scientific ban. Now, throughout the pandemic, our elected leaders have told us to follow the science, even though the reality has been that we haven't always understood the science. The travel ban made sense early in COVID. Our hospitals couldn't handle more cases. We didn't know if the virus was more communicable on airplanes. We didn't even have adequate PPE to protect ourselves. None of that is the case now. Because of the science, we are in the best place to date to protect ourselves and our loved ones from COVID. And it's not just Europe we should lift restrictions on, it's all countries with strong vaccine programs. Now, in an unexpected turn of events, the European Council decided to hop on the unscientific train and recommend barring travel of Americans to EU countries. This decision relies on the same flawed logic of the U.S. decision. And while the EU recommends allowing fully vaccinated Americans to travel to Europe, it doesn't allow the unvaccinated, even if they have negative tests, have antibodies, or wear a mask throughout. This isn't following the science. And in fact, this is the kind of policy that disincentivizes people from getting the life-saving vaccine. Many people say, why bother? The virus may be with us to stay for some time, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do our best to get back to safely living our lives the best we can. It's time to lift the travel bans, let people see their loved ones. Kim, I'd love your thoughts on this.
You know, it's interesting. You and I have kind of opposite viewpoints when it comes to the pandemic. I'm a big critic of vaccine mandates and the censorship that's been around some early treatment protocols. And, so I take a more critical role or critical viewpoint on those things. But when it comes to actually travel, that is where I differ with you a bit. I do think that the most effective way to stop variants from spreading into places or out of places is through travel restrictions. So I think what we've seen throughout the pandemic is that if you could close your borders, that is how you could possibly keep yourself the most safe. I think it's the most effective way to control the pandemic versus all of these other things that we've attempted and we've seen that they haven't really worked. So, I mean, ultimately, though, we do at some point have to get back on with our, we are a global community. Like you said, there are dual citizens. People want to travel. My grandmother wasn't able to see her son, my uncle who passed away. She wasn't able to be by her son's dying side for this very reason. So, I mean, I understand the need to get back to normal. I just don't. I think that the pandemic probably is going to need 3 years of waving around these various variants for people to build up maybe some sort of background immunity. But Ryan, what are your thoughts?
Well, and just one point of clarity, I'm not supportive of any mandates. I just highly recommend everyone consult their doctor and get vaccinated.
Oh, that's
true. I'm not in favor of a federal
You're right. I'm sorry. My mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, COVID is here. There's 330 million plus people in this country. People are coming back and forth across the border all the time. So it's not as if we're going to completely shut down like New Zealand style and just, keep the entire world out. That's just I don't see that as being a realistic path forward. I do get the idea that the variants that are what do you got, the Mu variant that's swimming around in Colombia right now. We don't necessarily want that surging around the world, but it's a pandemic, and so pandemic means it's a global virus, and so the way that we're going to get out of this, I think, is a combination of what Kim talked about. Where there's going to be some background immunity that comes from, from a number of people catching it and then acquiring antibodies and getting the entire world vaccinated. And so keeping people locked down until then, it doesn't seem like it's worth the squeeze to me.
Well, and my frustration throughout this virus, and I was working on it from the former administration side, was that a lot of times we kind of compared the U.S. to other countries that we're so different from. We're a massive country. One state, the state of Texas, is comparable to the size of the country of Germany. We're diverse. We are an international country, and to the side, this notion that if we purely close our borders and just sort of like hunker down as Americans with all 50 states, it's going to go away. I just don't think that really makes any sense. We're nothing like a New Zealand. We're nothing like a Sweden and these much smaller countries where it's an approach I disagree with, but scientifically it is an approach that works.
Well, it works pretty well in Vermont.
Well, we can't.
Well, what's the state of Vermont? What's the population?
The
yeah, really. Who's going to Vermont?
You couldn't catch it from the bears.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it definitely. I definitely agree with you, Alyssa. We have way too many dual citizens in this country. We have people crossing. We're not an island like New Zealand or even Australia that has that ability to do that. We have Canada, the north, and Mexico, and people coming in and out, and so we can't really do it. But I do think it would maybe help slow. So I kind of understand the logic in the travel restrictions, but I miss Europe. I really do.
Me too. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we also have a border crisis that the Biden administration is not dealing with. And you have immigrants who are being released into the interior of the country who aren't vaccinated. So that, of course, is factoring into the continued spread of the virus.
Which is crazy. Everybody at the border should be getting a vaccine.
Vaccinate them, yeah. Well, anyway, Ryan, I'm looking forward to your radar next.